Okay, it's really nice to be here. I always enjoy coming and giving my annual lecture. I know that you guys are all essentially pharmacy type people, so you're very much interested in the chemistry and what we can do with the potential medical side of hemp and cannabis. But I'm going to show you that it's a much, much bigger world than that. And that all of this starts with a plant. It starts with this one, cannabis sativa. And one of my main objectives this afternoon is to convince you that this is the most amazing plant on the planet, by far. It's not even close, okay? Because this one plant is the source for not just one type of industry, but at least 3 major types of industry. And depending on who you actually talk to and look at individual things that it can be used for, the uses of this plant are over 10,000, probably over 25,000, and I've seen as high as 50,000. So it can be used for a huge number of different things, one area of which is the medicinal one, but it's not the only one by far. So this is a really, really interesting plant to work with, but it's also a minefield. So every year when I come in and talk to the professor here, we have new stories about the good stuff and the bad stuff. So it's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. This year, we've had a step forward potentially with the rescheduling, although it hasn't happened yet, but we've had a step back with the bizarre sort of farm bill thing about hemp. So it's difficult to work on this, but the reason that I work on this is because it is so exciting in so many different ways. So this is a cannabis sativa leaf, and the first thing I want to emphasize is cannabis sativa L is a single species. You might, and we'll talk about this and I'll show some of it later, see various people that tell you that the recreational varieties are very different from the medicinal, that are very different from the hemp varieties, and they can be, but it's still the same species. You can take something that has very low THC, a very, very tall, thin plant, and it's grown for fiber, and cross it with a little squat one that's grown at the local dispensary for recreational, and it's the same species, and you'll get offspring, okay? So this is the main thing. So one species, and this means that industrial hemp, medical marijuana, and recreational are all the 3 main types of industries that come from this one plant, okay? So that's the good thing. The bad thing comes in here with the way in which cannabis as a plant has been treated over the years, and this is a quote from the Controlled Substance Act from, I think, the early 70s, like 70, 71, something like that. And it says, the term marijuana, which is spelt incorrectly, means all parts of the cannabis sativa plant, whether growing or not, the seed thereof, the resin extracted from any such plant, and every compound, manufacture, salt derivative mixture or preparation of such plant, its seeds or resin. So here, every compound. So what that effectively did is it completely made using cannabis to make new medicines illegal. So this is the problem. And the funny thing about it is they were thinking about doing this before the Second World War. It was in process, essentially. And then the Second World War came along, and they realized they needed hemp. We'll talk about it in more detail, but the reason they needed it is it makes the best cordage for the Navy, because the fibers from hemp are the strongest around. So they had to reverse it, and there's even adverts that they play and sort of little films that they showed in the cinema about trying to make people grow hemp. So in the war they did that, and then almost immediately afterwards they went and outlawed it. So the whole thing makes no sense, and you'll get an abiding feeling as we go through that a lot of this doesn't make sense, but you should get a good feeling for the possibilities. Now, here are the 3 main areas that we're talking about in terms of what cannabis can be used for. So there's the first one here, industrial hemp. It was made federally legal, officially, in certain ways. They have to get a license and stuff in 2018 in the 2018 Farm Bill. And there's two major areas that hemp is used for. One is fiber, as I mentioned, so that also includes things like textiles, paper, and lots of other things. And the other one is food and supplements. And we'll talk about that. So if you go to Wegmans, you'll find supplements that have hemp in it. You'll find hemp seed oil. You'll find a lot of other things that are based on using hemp as the source of a food. So all of this is basic industrial hemp. It's nothing to do with the chemicals and stuff. Then we get the medical marijuana part. So that's the second of the three tranches, okay? So medical marijuana is using the cannabis plant as the source of medicines. Now, I haven't got the slide actually this year. I just remembered I put an extra slide in, but I haven't got it this year. But it was something we talked about last year. When we're talking about cannabis, everybody always thinks of cannabinoids, and they are amazing, and we'll talk about those. But there are also other compounds which are important. The ones that are really important, I think, are actually the terpenes. Terpenes like myrcene have also been shown to have specific effects. Myrcene tends to make you drowsy, and for certain applications that's quite useful. The terpenes are also what gives the smell and the taste to a cannabis plant, okay? Cannabinoids are fat-soluble, they have no smell or taste. Terpenes are water-soluble, that's what you have the smell and the taste for. So if you go to a CBD store, for example, and they have various different things for you, and it's called something like blueberry or whatever, it's because the mix of terpenes in that particular plant that contains the high CBD for you has certain characteristics that make it smell and taste like blueberries. So that's actually really very, very interesting. Now, the thing about the medical marijuana is it sort of spans two major areas, okay? Because the whole of the cannabis sativa world is split into two halves. The hemp half, which is below 0.3% THC, and everything else, which counts as recreational, which is federally illegal, which is above 0.3% THC. Okay? This 0.3% THC is very important, but it's an artificial chemical line drawn in the sand. Okay? It's trying to make sure that this industrial hemp stuff isn't possible to use for recreational purposes. And in other parts of the world, this might be 0.3%. You could probably do 1%. You wouldn't be able, if you smoked to 1%, you'd have to smoke a huge amount to even have the slightest high. So it's well below the threshold. Now, the problem, of course, is that this creates quite a number of problems. The 0.3% isn't always checked in the same way. So what does 0.3% actually mean? Well, in some places, it means that the highest you can have is 0.299. In other places, it means, for example, you can get, let me put it another way. In other places, they only look at the first decimal point, and they don't care about anything else. So 0.3 is all they want to see, and it has to be above 0.3. So 0.39999 still counts as below 0.3. So there's a huge variation on what this actually means. But in practice, what it means is there are varieties of industrial hemp which characteristically tend to get quite close to this limit and can test hot under certain conditions. If they do, they count as recreational and they're federally illegal. There are also plants that look identical in this area, one of which might have high levels, for example, of CBD or CBG, and it counts as hemp, and another plant that looks identical but has slightly higher levels of THC, and that would actually be recreational and is federally illegal. So there's your problem in the medical marijuana world. You're trying to use maybe the ones that count as hemp, but in reality, THC has positive effects as well, and a lot of the perceived wisdom says that the best mix of different cannabinoids for medicine does include levels of THC which might be higher than 0.3%. Okay? But, and there is one big but on this, a lot of this is conjectural, because as most of this is illegal, we don't have really the clinical trial results that we need to be able to base this on. A lot of it is anecdotal. And I'll show you a bit later why all of those anecdotal things actually mean that we're in the right area. Okay, so if we look at this, the current value, and this is actually from a couple of years ago, all three of these areas that I've shown you, the industrial hemp, the medical marijuana, and the recreational, are billion-dollar industries, okay? And this is the estimate from about 2020, I think, of where that's going to go. And it shows that we're talking about over $100 billion for the total industry. Now, this is probably wildly inaccurate because politics come into it so much. Now, this was almost certainly done when the CBD boom was happening, and we'll talk about the boom and bust thing with CBD. So this is probably going to be low. If the rescheduling happens and we get research, this might be higher. And what I can also tell you is, based on what I've seen just in the Buffalo area, the recreational cannabis world seems to be doing relatively well in terms of just the number of dispensaries that are opening. So this might be lower. But nevertheless, three major areas of billion-dollar industry. It's not bad for one plant species, really. Okay.